Sometimes change is simply uncomfortable. Sometimes progress simply feels hard. It's not a badge of honor if your clients only experience positive emotions when they're working with you.
Ahead of the game.
Hey there, I'm Kel Siddiqui. What started as helping people with their money at my dining room table grew into a 7-figure financial coaching practice. Now I teach others how to build a thriving coaching business of their own. Whether you're just starting out or you've been coaching for years, I'm here to help you make a bigger impact while doing what you love. This is the Financial Coach Academy podcast. Let's dive in. Hey, Coach, welcome back. Today, I want to talk about something subtle but really important that I see show up all the time in coaching and financial education, especially among coaches who care deeply about their clients. We're going to talk about the difference between emotional overholding and confidence building, what it looks like in real sessions, why it happens so often, and how to shift it without becoming cold, disconnected, or less compassionate. Because if you are listening to this, chances are you are a coach because you genuinely care about people. You're empathetic, you want to help. And personally, I think that is one of your greatest strengths as a financial professional. The math is usually the easy part. Guiding people through change, especially when money is involved, is where things get more complex. And sometimes that very strength can quietly work against you. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because empathy can slip into something else without us realizing it. What I'm talking about is emotional overholding. This is when a coach starts carrying more of the emotional weight of the session than the client needs, or than is actually helpful in the long run. It often looks like a lot of reassurance, a lot of pre-processing, a lot of emotional cushioning, all in the name of compassion. Over time, that kind of coaching doesn't build confidence. It can actually erode it. And I know that's not what you want. And it can also lead to burnout for the coach as well. Here's the core issue underneath it. People don't struggle with money because they lack information. Most of the time they struggle because they haven't learned how to trust themselves while still feeling uncertainty. And when we sense that discomfort, our instinct as caring professionals is to smooth it over. We reassure, we explain more, we try to make it feel better. You've heard me say before that at first, our clients borrow from our belief in coaching, in their potential, in our process, and in us. But if you're not careful and without intending to, we can actually commit our trust for the client instead of helping them build their own. In other words, the result is not them borrowing our belief in a temporary way, but it becomes the thing they need session after session. Certain coaching styles, especially well-intentioned ones, can actually train people out of self-trust, not because the coach is careless or unskilled, but because reassurance replaces capacity. I have noticed this in coaches that I've mentored, but to be honest, I also noticed that I was on the receiving end of this once too. I had a mentor that I had been working with for almost a year, and then one day I canceled the contract and we parted ways. I told Erica, my director of operations, that I had realized that I was actually trusting myself less since we started working together, not more. And as soon as I noticed it, I was done. I just was. It was such a subtle thing for a long time. And then as soon as I noticed it, I was like, this isn't for me. My goal with coaching, to be on the receiving end of it, but also delivering coaching, is trust and confidence building, not erosion. Now, this isn't a critique of kindness. It's a conversation about effectiveness. Let me show you where this tends to show up most clearly. The first moment is when reality is hard to look at. Let's say you're preparing for a session. You're reviewing the numbers, maybe for the first time, and you realize something critical. Your client's expenses exceed their income by several $100s a month. There's no obvious fix, no quick lever to pull. You've already explored the most common options and it's still tight or over budget. This is often the moment where coaches feel the most pressure. Maybe you can relate. Questions start popping up like, how do I tell them this? Or they're going to be really upset. Or what if I make this worse? What's happening there isn't a lack of skill. It's emotional overholding. You're pre-processing the client's feelings, coach. You're trying to make the reality feel more manageable before it's even been named. and you're taking responsibility for how they might feel about something that isn't even your doing. There is a really important distinction here. There's a difference between compassionate delivery and emotional ownership. We don't say you're broke, but we also don't avoid the conversation because it's uncomfortable either. What we might say is right now, your expenses are about $700 higher than your income each month. That is clear, accurate, and compassionate. Your job in that moment isn't to make the math feel better. It's to present the reality clearly, calmly, and without making it a statement about who they are as a person. Emotional overholding happens when we soften reality or when we avoid naming the gap or the issue because we're worried about how it will land. You are the messenger. You are their guide, not the manager of someone's emotions. Sometimes change is simply uncomfortable. Sometimes progress simply feels hard. It's not a badge of honor if your clients only experience positive emotions when they're working with you. The second moment where this shows up a lot is when a client hesitates after hearing your guidance. So you make a recommendation, but there's a pause. They hesitate. Maybe they say something like, I've tried something like that before, or I'm not sure that will work, or that makes me nervous. And it's very easy to interpret that moment as something going wrong. Coaches often assume the client is resisting or disengaging, or that the recommendation wasn't good enough. So you jump in, you explain more, you soften, you justify, you try to make it feel better. But liking a recommendation is not the same thing as being bought in, and hesitation is not the same thing as refusal. Sometimes the most confidence building thing you can do is guide the direction of the session while allowing space for that uncertainty. Something as simple as, I hear you and I'm curious. Would you be open to trying this for the next 2 weeks and then we can reassess? That sentence acknowledges their concern. It doesn't dismiss their experience and it still keeps momentum. Keep in mind, they can also say no to that question too. Emotional overholding often shows up as needing immediate enthusiasm. Confidence building allows room for discomfort and action at the same time. Now, this is a really fine line that isn't always easy to spot, especially when you're new and gaining experience. This isn't something you are going to pass or fail at. So let me describe what emotional overholding can actually look like without judgment so that you can better spot it. Here are 6 of the most common examples of emotional overholding that I see when I'm observing coaches' sessions. First, preparing excessively because you're worried about how a client will feel. This isn't about preparing because there's a genuine need, but more so about trying to manage their potential emotional response ahead of time. Number 2, walking on eggshells. This typically shows up before anything is even said. So maybe that looks like clamming up or shifting into passivity, even though there are things you think are important to say. So you might be saying to yourself in your head, I don't want to upset them, or I should tread lightly. If you change what you plan to say based on imagined reactions, that's a sign you are emotional overholding. Now, both of these first 2 examples are anticipatory emotional management. They show up typically in advance of a conversation or session. These next 4 all happen during the conversation. The first one is softening your delivery on reality. We should all think about our delivery, of course, but this softening happens because real time you're thinking, I should make this feel better. So you use vague language instead of clear language, or maybe you minimize the seriousness of a situation. Or it can sound like adding unnecessary qualifiers for reassurance. That's my MO. The fourth common example of emotional overholding is over-explaining or justifying instead of holding the direction or purpose. So you're thinking they don't seem convinced, or if I just give them more context, they'll feel better about this recommendation. There are so many times I watch a coaching session and the client is clearly just processing. They're just thinking about what you suggested, and already the coach is jumping in to justify it. Let the client engage with the recommendation before you start selling them the idea even more or adding extra rationale, because it's not an immediate enthusiastic yes that you hear. Okay. You hear me talk about buy-in on this podcast often. So let me say this here. Buy-in doesn't always look like excitement or enthusiasm. Sometimes it's very reserved or calm or cautious. That is okay too. Your fifth example of emotional overholding is avoiding saying something important because you're worried about their reaction. And one that shows up a lot in financial coaching, your sixth example, is feeling personally offended when a client makes a decision between sessions that you don't agree with. That's usually a sign that you're carrying something that isn't yours to carry, coach. Now, I want to reiterate that all of these behaviors come from good intentions, but they subtly move you out of your role and they don't build capacity in your client either. And I know that is not what you want. Guiding the direction means trusting the client's ability to engage even when it's uncomfortable. For me, the signal that something was off wasn't intellectual. It was energetic. I noticed that I felt drained at the end of the day. I felt tense before sessions instead of feeling calm. And that is not how this work is supposed to feel. What I had to admit to myself was that sometimes I wanted more for a client than they wanted for themselves. It is this delicate dance where you see someone's potential, you see them at their best. And I know I see them achieving the thing they tell me they want, while also staying present to where they are now, today, and in this session. There is a fine line between seeing someone's potential and expecting them to live up to it on your timeline, under your conditions, regardless of their circumstances. That's not fair to the client either, and it's definitely not sustainable for you or me, coach. Reassurance itself isn't the problem. It just has a job. Reassurance is meant to help someone regulate enough to take action in the present moment. It is not meant to guarantee outcomes or remove any uncertainty they may be experiencing. Here's how I like to think of it. Reassurance should reinforce capability, not certainty. Here's another useful distinction. If reassurance helps someone see how far they've come, it builds confidence. If it's used to control what they do next, it starts to feel manipulative, even if the intention behind it is good. Reassurance should sound like, you're capable of navigating this, not, don't worry, this will definitely work. What confident clients actually do isn't avoid struggle. It's that they can reflect on it. They can tell you what they were thinking before a decision, how they felt in the moment, what happened afterward, and what they make of it now. They don't gloss over discomfort. They don't indict themselves either when things are hard. They give themselves appropriate credit and they evaluate outcomes without collapsing. That's emotional regulation. That's maturity. And that's what we're really building in this work. So let's bring it back to just one session, one moment, or one decision you may experience. The next time you feel tempted to soften reality, rescue a client from discomfort, over-explain, or take responsibility for their emotional response, pause and ask yourself this. Is this mine to carry, or is it theirs to work through? Is this mine to carry, or is it theirs to work through? You are there as they work through it, but you are not there to carry it for them. That's how confidence is built, and that's work worth doing. I will see you next week, coach. That's all for today. If you're ready to grow your own financial coaching business, head over to financialcoachacademy.com for helpful resources and tools. If this episode helped you, hit subscribe and leave us a review. I'll see you next week.